It's really interesting because I would posit that one of the corrosive legacies of Nixon was that for very good reason, he instilled in many of us a capacity to believe the absolute worst about our leaders. He had done so many truly evil, corrupt, terrible things that we really imagine that a Democratic president, a Republican president, a president of any sort, capable of, because we saw it. It happened. And it's not that we shouldn't be very suspicious when suspicious things occur, and it's not that we shouldn't spend as many weeks in Cincinnati as we need to, but we've lost the capacity to believe in the fundamental, well, decency and politicians might not be the right words to put together, but that they're not all entirely, completely corrupt. They're all they've all kind of descended to Nixonian levels in our minds.
Yeah, so your assignment for the four of us would be to go out and find some decency.
No, decency does not
in
sell,
American
and I'm all
politics.
about getting Marty as many page views as he can get.
Could I just tell a real live anecdote?
You can tell a real live anecdote.
Because I think we're getting a little off track, and we're kind of thinking, yeah, well, we get to the bottom of these things, or we understand them, or we can do a little reporting. And this was 30 days after Nixon resigned. Gerald Ford was president. It was September 1974. Some of you may recall he went on television early on a Sunday morning announcing he was giving Nixon a full pardon for Watergate. Now, he went on television early on a Sunday morning hoping no one would notice. Well, it was noticed, but not by me. I was asleep, and Carl called me up and said, "Have you heard?" And I said, "No, I was asleep." And Carl, who then and still has the ability to say what occurred in the fewest words with the most drama, said, "The son of a bitch pardoned the son of a bitch." Happy to report I figured it out. And we thought from that moment on, the pardon is the final perfect corruption of Watergate. That the guy, Nixon, who instigated it all, gets a pardon, 40 people go to jail, and if you look at the history of this, in '76, Ford lost to Carter, perhaps because of the pardon and the suspicion about it. 25 years later, I undertook one of the book projects, Shadow, about the legacy of Watergate in the presidencies of Ford through Clinton, and called Ford up, who I'd never met, never interviewed, and said, "I want to talk to you about the pardon." And he said, "Fine." And I interviewed him 6 or 7 times in New York, his home, in Colorado, his main home in Rancho Mirage. I had 2 assistants, have the luxury of time. Well, what happened? Why did you pardon Richard Nixon? And I kept asking him that. And it was only in the 6th or 7th interview in his home, I said, "Why'd you pardon Nixon?" He said, "You keep asking the same question." And I said, "I don't think you've answered it." And then he said, "Okay, I'll tell you." Now, these are the moments you live for in journalism. And he said, "What happened?" And this, he said, Al Haig, who was Nixon's chief of staff, came to me and offered a deal. And it would have been illegal if I'd said, "I'll accept the deal." He said, "I, in fact, rejected the deal because what Haig said, if Nixon resigns, you get the presidency, and Nixon needs to know he's going to be pardoned." And Ford convincingly said, "Look, I rejected that deal. I pardoned Nixon, not for myself, but for the good of the country." And then he laid out his reasoning, which was very compelling, I thought. And he said, "Look, I had a letter from the Watergate prosecutor, Leon Jaworski, saying Nixon is a private citizen, now is going to be investigated, certainly will be indicted, tried, probably convicted, go to jail. So Ford said, we'll have 2 or 3 more years of Watergate. The economy was in trouble, the Cold War was still on. He said the country could not stand it, and he said, very plaintively, he said, I needed my own presidency. And convinced me, and I think convinced Carl and many people
Great
that this
courageous
was an
act.
act of courage
Great courageous.
rather than the final corruption of
Yeah, but he said it
Watergate.
at the time. I thought it was
Looking at
crazy.
that 25 years later, it makes you real humble. And in fact, to a certain extent, it's humiliating that we were so sure in '76 what it was, and then it's subjected to a neutral, in-depth inquiry 25 years after the fact, and what looks like that looks exactly the
I don't know, I
opposite.
believed him at the time. It made a lot of sense. That would have been the story for the next couple of years. He wouldn't have been able to govern. And as he said, the X years of Watergate is enough. We were tired. The country was tired of it. And we had to move on. I thought it was a wise decision then.